Hi, my name is Michael Dominiak, and I'm a close friend of your professor, Kathleen Jarris-Darbison. She approached me about doing this video for you folks about my personal point of view as a gay person in the United States. When you think of gay people, today we're often portrayed as characters on reality shows and situation comedies. But it's a little bit deeper than all of that, as I'm sure you can imagine. To give you a little information about myself, I was born in Chamberlain, South Dakota, which is a small rural town along the Missouri River. Population at that time was about 1,200. I graduated with, I think, 30 people, 13 of which were my cousins, which made getting away with anything very difficult, and being different made it even more hard to come out in, a small rural town. The prairie states are very religious in nature, and during my youth, which was the early 60s, the most you ever heard about homosexuality was that it was bad, that it was against God, that if you were a homosexual, you were an abomination. There were always religious ramifications dealing with your soul and making it to heaven. But in the early 70s, around 1976, in a small bar in New York City known as the Stonewall Inn, the police would routinely go in and arrest the patrons because it was, after all, illegal to be a homosexual at that time in the United States. I guess the patrons had had enough to drink and were just tired of the police constantly, publishing their pictures and their names in the papers as being suspected homosexuals that had been found in, a homosexual establishment. On this particular night, which was the 29th of June, 1976, they fought back. They actually had a riot. And that time, that date, is now historically the same time each and every year that the gay community celebrates or holds its pride events. That night was known as the Stonewall Rebellion, and actually was the beginning of civil rights here in America. At that time, you weren't seeing a lot of people portrayed in the media, as far as movies or shows. Liberace was around, but even he was in the closet, not that anyone didn't know that he was certainly gay. What I decided to do, I came out my freshman year of college, once I was away from my hometown. I actually had a best friend that I grew up my whole life with. We were both gay, but neither one of us told the other until we had moved away from our small town because, I think we were afraid of disappointing one another. Even though we knew that the feelings that we were having, we just didn't really know if we could trust the other person enough to keep our secret. I moved to San Francisco in my early 20s. At that time, San Francisco was a vibrant, thrilling place to go. When I got off the airplane and arrived on Castro Street, which was the gay area of San Francisco, it was like Christmas and Candyland all rolled into one. It was the first time I really felt like I belonged, that was my family. At that time, sex has always been a really big part of the gay community. I don't know if it's any more than any other, but it's often been portrayed as, that we're very promiscuous. I don't know if it's promiscuous or it's just the fact that at that time men felt like if they had an opportunity to have sex with someone, they needed to do it and get it out of the way because it may not happen again for a very long time because it was hidden. San Francisco is where I met my first partner, who I was with for 13 years. Like I mentioned earlier, San Francisco at that time was, all about everybody having a sense of, unity. Again, the civil rights movement, as far as the gay community was concerned, was just really kind of getting rolling. At that time, people could actually be fired if they were homosexual. I had actually gone to college to be a special education teacher, but when I moved out to California, at that time they had just passed a law, and all of the teachers, if they were known to be gay, were being fired. Not very long after I got there, I believe it was about 1985, Time magazine published its first article about the HIV epidemic. And all it was the word AIDS across the cover. I remember that time like it was yesterday because it took a city full of energy, enthusiastic dreamers, and just decimated it. People who tested for HIV were told by their physicians, you have this disease, and at that time it was called GRID, gay-related infectious disease, or gay cancer, because a large number of the people were getting these purple lesions all over their skin. It was estimated that at least 45% of the population was already infected with HIV when it was finally addressed, publicly. At that time, there were no medications. Doctors would tell you, you have this disease, get your affairs in order because you're going to die. And people did just that. They died. There was no hope for them. Nowadays we have medications and we have groups to help. But back then there was nothing. And because society looked at us as less than, the average human being, the gay community has always kind of felt that testing and research was on the slow track because it really wasn't affecting anybody but gay people. And as far as the heterosexual world was concerned, it's like, well, they deserve it because they're, engaging in this perverse sexual activity. So if it just affects them and they're the only ones that die, then actually this might be beneficial to the world as a whole, is really what some people thought. There was a newspaper in San Francisco known as the Bay Area Reporter, or the BAR. It was the gay rag. It came out weekly, and you would go and pick it up to see where all the parties were and what major events were going on. But it had a small little section where people could put in obituaries of gay people that had passed away. When I first moved there, maybe had 5, 6, a dozen at the most. The last one that I picked up, which was in the 90s, had a pull-out section that was like, if you get the Sunday paper and you have the Parade magazine that's an insert in the Sunday paper, it was like that. It was page after page after page of obituaries. Castro Street, like I said, which was the place where all the gay bars were, and it was gay-owned businesses and everything, began to be, it took on an air of, it was like a war zone. The energy was sucked right out of the city, and particularly in that neighborhood in general. The effect overall on the community was, we're dying. No one is there to help us. We weren't getting any information. Doctors and hospitals didn't have any information either. At that time, there was only one place. The very first clinic to ever be set up was set up in San Francisco. That was Ward B. Ward B, the staff there had to volunteer to work there. The hospital did not want to be associated with an AIDS hospital out of fear that their regular people pursuing health, needs would not come to the hospital if they were known as an AIDS hospital. So all the staff had to be volunteers. I remember an issue of the Bay Area Reporter where they published all the pictures in 1 year of the patients that they had lost to AIDS. There were over 480 photographs from just 1 year from one hospital. The numbers were far greater than that. People that you would see one day would literally be gone the next. There were such things as, to let you know how ridiculous people thought HIV was, there was actually a law trying to be passed that would actually quarantine people with HIV. Testing was to no longer be anonymous, and if you got a positive test result, it could be published with your name and identifying information, and you would be branded with an identification tattoo that indicated you were infected with HIV. It was not a good place to be. So what happened is the community itself, I should say the lesbians of the community, came together. Something you need to realize, at that time, it was the gays. That was kind of encompassed everyone. Well, then we brought on, it became gay men, and it became lesbian, transgender, queer, questioning. I mean, we became all-inclusive. Unfortunately, primarily it was the gay men that were being affected. Still to this day, they're the largest number, I believe, in our community that are being affected. So the lesbians came up to the plate. They began having blood draws. They became care providers. The city itself had its own issues going on. Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk, the first openly gay politician in San Francisco, were both murdered in San Francisco during this time period. Another thing that was happening was the fact that we as people felt that we were being overlooked. So organizations started popping up, like ACT UP. There were marches. There were candlelight marches. We wanted somebody to do something, and they needed to do it fast because people were dying too quickly. My partner and I met probably about a month after I got there. And at that time, I mean, we didn't practice safe sex because we really didn't know that much about HIV or AIDS. It hadn't been put out there. And if we caught anything, you could get a shot or a pill for it. You know, syphilis, gonorrhea, it was not a big deal. So from the very beginning, we never really did engage in safe sex. When my partner tested in the early 90s, it was difficult. We kind of felt at this point, if we didn't, at least I felt, if I didn't have it, you know, I would have been shocked because we had engaged in unprotected sex, we had had some drug use. So I didn't get tested right away, but he did. Not only was the city having to care for itself, but all of a sudden I found myself in the role of a care provider. My partner got very, very sick. When you look at someone who was 6'4", 189 pounds, you know, very muscular, very masculine, got a disease from a plant called toxoplasmosis that caused areas of his brain to literally dissolve. He forgot how to speak. He forgot how to swallow. He couldn't care for himself. So I became his care provider, like many, many people did in San Francisco, because nobody else would care for us. Unfortunately, it got to the point where it was just too much for me to take care of him. You know, and out there in San Francisco, because it was a gay mecca, there were things that you could do as a gay person. You could sign a durable power of attorney, and that person then had the right to take care of you, become your healthcare proxy, and I did all of that. Then I decided to take him back to where he was from so that he could be near his family, his mother in particular. And she was fine to have us until the point came where she wanted me to withhold his medications because he wasn't talking, and she didn't feel like he had a quality of life that, you know, she necessarily approved of. You know, as long as we were paying rent, everything was fine, but when I decided that I would not stop, you know, his medication, she had me removed from their home. She had the police come get me and said that I was trespassing. Needless to say, my partner died less than a month later. I was never allowed to go to his funeral. The paperwork that I had signed in California, unfortunately, did not transfer over to Michigan. I was, however, the first person ever in the state of Michigan to fight a biological family member for the remains of their partner, because it specified in the documents that we had set up that should happen. Unfortunately, it got to be too large of a battle, and I had to actually let it go. You know, now we're into my 30s, and the world's starting to evolve. I lost my partner. I moved to yet another city, and I decided this kind of stuff can't happen, you know, in this day and age. I need to get involved. So I became an advocate for change, both for political issues and for medical issues as well. Other things happened. Ellen DeGeneres broke open the door of her homosexuality on TV. It was one of the most watched television shows of the time. People that were gay were finally saying, you know what, enough is enough. We can say we want civil rights, but as long as we're in the closet, those rights are never going to be ours. So we need to come out. We need to let the people know that we're here and that we're not different from anybody else. Around that same time, there was a resurgence of hate crimes. They weren't even called hate crimes there at that time. I'm not sure if you recall a young man by the name of Matthew Shepard, who in 1998 brought really to focus the horrific way that some people look at gays. Matthew was 19 years old, living in Wyoming, and was brutally murdered by 3 boys and left to die literally tied up to a barbed wire fence out in the middle of a field. Because of that incident and the outcry of the gay community and those that support us, hate crime laws came into effect. Hate crime laws have been in existence since World War II, but they were always looked at things like, ethnic cleansing. They had never really been applied to our community before this time. We still don't, at this time, we still didn't have rights over parents. I can't tell you how many times I saw friends of mine who one would die, the partners' families that would come in and throw the partner out of the apartment or the home that they lived in together, take all the possessions, take the house, not allow the other partner to be in the same hospital room as their partner died. And because there were no laws to protect that, it happened far too often. About this time, which is I'm in my later 30s, I had moved to Michigan, as I mentioned, when I brought my partner back, and I was in Detroit. I was working for a nonprofit organization called the Midwest AIDS Prevention Project, who for 13 years worked very closely with providing HIV prevention work throughout the entire state of Michigan. I became even more active politically. And I think it was easier at this time. Again, media had kind of really started to evolve. Movies like Philadelphia with Tom Hanks came out, where it didn't portray us in a negative way, but in a more positive way. Homosexuality was a little bit more acceptable. Now, if we move to where we are now, in the year 2013, and I look back at what's happened, there are many states now that have gay marriage. At the very least, have partnership or benefits going to those individuals who can prove that they are in a loving relationship and have been for a while. When 9/11 happened, many gays and lesbians were in the Twin Towers and lost their lives. But when the government paid out benefits to the surviving partners, gay and lesbian spouses or partners were exempt from that. They never received a dime. All the gay community really is looking for is civil rights. We don't want, special rights, as some people call it. We just want the same rights as everyone else. We want to be able to have the same tax breaks, the same protections under the law. I guess if you were to, I remember when I was very young hearing Annette Funicello talk about, was it Annette? Yeah, I think it was. And Jerry Falwell talk about the gay agenda. I always thought, we don't want to make everybody gay. In fact, there are some people that we'd rather not be gay. We just want to be able to live and love who we want. And if that's a gay agenda, then I guess the gay agenda is working, because you can hardly turn on a television now without seeing a gay person in some show. Sports and celebrities are coming out all over the place. Even political people are coming out. So as a gay person growing up in rural South Dakota, I can say we've come quite a ways, and I'm very proud to have been part of that. But there's still a long way to go. And we're not the only part of this culture that is still stigmatized and judged. So there will be another group after ours. So if you are in a position to where you can affect some change in your area, I encourage you to do so. And I would also like to thank you very much for sitting in to this rather informal, but I hope informative interview.